Welcome to 30 Minutes of Better Boundary Solutions. My name is Michelle Ferris. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist, and I'm here with Sharon Martin, and we are going to be talking about boundaries today. But first, if you don't know me, I'm a psychotherapist. I specialize in codependency and anger.
Hi, everybody. I'm Sharon Martin. I am also a psychotherapist in San Jose, and I specialize in working with people around issues of codependency and perfectionism and people pleasing. Yeah, so Michelle, why don't you give us the first struggle, the first dilemma?
All right, so the first dilemma is Marilyn. Marilyn's in-laws frequently visit them on short notice. When her husband's family arrives, they expect Marilyn to drop everything and spend time with them. Marilyn really wants to insist on more notice and planning. She thinks they're being unreasonable, but is afraid of their reaction since her father-in-law tends to be hot-headed. What can Marilyn do to set a boundary and detach from his anger?
Great question. So the first thing that comes to mind whenever we're talking about an issue with in-laws is that this is not just Marilyn's boundary struggle. And I think if Marilyn is going to be successful in setting a boundary with her in-laws, she really needs to get her partner involved. This is her partner's parents. So the partner presumably has the closer relationship with the parents, more insight into their behavior. And again, we need to be a united front. It's not going to work out well, I think, from Marilyn's relationship with her in-laws if she's sort of the bad guy who's coming in and saying, don't do this, I don't like this. Instead, it's going to, I think, be better received if it's Marilyn and her partner saying together, this isn't working for us. Can we strategize, some different ways to spend time together? And that's the other thing that stands out here is that this isn't a situation, I don't think, where Marilyn doesn't want to see her in-laws at all. So it's like, there has to be some way of coming to a compromise, something that could be agreeable to everybody. So those are my first thoughts. What do you want to add in there?
Yeah, I agree. I think you're making a really important point that I think we've seen a lot in our practices is that people tend to be really hot in wanting to set the boundary when they're the in-law, and that really can spiral into a lot of conflict that we can avoid. But I think that negotiation piece is really key because as the in-law, you may not get everything you want in the situation, but hopefully between you and your partner, you can work out something that's going to work at least better than them coming in unannounced. The other thing I'm thinking about, because the father-in-law has a tendency to be a hothead, the first thing when you're dealing with someone difficult or that tends to get angry in communication or in conflict is to make sure you have your physical boundaries set, which means you're not standing too close to them. You have plenty of distance so you don't take on their energy. Because I know, at least for me, if I'm around somebody that's really angry and I'm too close to them, like in a car or sitting next to them, I feel engulfed by their feeling. And that makes me not think clearly. I can't set a boundary because I'm scared. Whereas if I take that distance, it's going to be easier for me not to take it personally and to remember that, this is their reaction, not mine. Sometimes that is kind of the first line of defense when it's really difficult people. The other thing I was thinking about, I love what you're talking about in terms of the negotiation is that, sometimes because we're not going to get everything we want, especially with in-laws, the larger goal to me, and I'm sure you'd probably agree, is preserving the relationship because, sometimes, in-laws are going to be difficult. Have you seen that in your practice?
Yes, I think that's a really great point. And I think it probably goes to a lot of boundary setting issues is the idea of how can I preserve the relationship? Because that's what most of us want, is to be able to continue the relationship, but to also feel like our needs are being met, that we're being respected, and as you pointed out, that doesn't mean that we get everything that we want all of the time. Right. This is, sort of part of being a mature adult in relationships is that there's compromise, but we also can't feel like we're giving in on on things that are really key, right? And in this case, if Marilyn's in-laws continue to show up unannounced, that's going to feel disrespectful, especially after, Marilyn and her partner talked to the in-laws about not doing this. But again, I think as I was sort of, alluding to earlier, we can also look for, what's working here, which is they have in-laws who want to spend time with them. Right. And
that's a good thing.
There's something good in that. Exactly. And if we can figure out how to, change this dynamic a little bit so that it's working better for everybody involved. There's a lot of potential there. One other thing that I just want to mention real quick that you reminded me of is the idea of timing when we're setting boundaries. Because again, the tendency is for us to be reactive in the moment, to, be frustrated with somebody's behavior, especially in a situation like this where it's an ongoing issue and it's been happening for a while. Probably her frustration's building, right? We want to just say something right now, but it usually doesn't come out very well when we do that, right? It shows that we're frustrated and we're angry, and we haven't really thought through exactly what it is that we are looking for in this situation. And so I think there's a lot of benefit here, both for there to sort of be this offline meeting between Marilyn and her partner in which they figure out how they want to handle this, and then have, approach the in-laws at another time, not when they're at the doorstep doing this behavior, right? And I think this holds true in a lot of boundary setting situations, is that we are more effective if we can just wait until we're calm, we've thought things through, we maybe, rehearse what we want to say, and we've got a plan, and we see that, the other person is going to be more receptive when we, look for a time when they're attentive and they're not angry and so forth. Anything else that you want to mention on Marilyn?
One thing I was thinking about that might help is if Marilyn and her husband disagree, right? And the husband is adamant, no, I really want my parents to show up spontaneously. That's what we've always done as a family. One of the things she could do is politely take care of herself in that situation and say, oh, love that you're here. I have a commitment. I need to. And then she gets to light and polite, be kind, but also still take care of herself in that situation, instead of saying, well, I can't believe you're here again, and get into that negative dialogue. Instead, she just kind of light and politely sets her boundary and does what she was originally set to do.
Great. That's a great addition, because you're right. I mean, we could have probably a whole nother conversation about how does Marilyn negotiate this with her partner, because her partner may or may not see this as an issue. And often that's just as big of a struggle. And that may be why this hasn't happened yet, is that her spouse may say, I don't really mind this. But again, there's a relational piece between the two of them that we need to be able to convey to our partner why something is a problem for us, how we feel about it, how it affects us. And presumably, your partner will care. I mean, that's why we're with each other, right? Is that, the other person should care about your feelings and your needs and be willing to hear you out and, try to figure out how to be supportive of that, but in a way, that feels mutual.
Right. Well, I think that's so cornerstone. What you're saying is talk to your spouse first. Don't immediately react and try to set the boundary by yourself. Because I think if there's anything to be learned in this scenario, at least do that, like you're saying, because I think that is going to at least put you in a more positive direction.
Okay, well, why don't we move on to our next scenario? Okay, perfect. So this one is Oliver, and here's what is going on for him. So Oliver tends to overcommit. His boss asked him to take on an extra project, and he said yes, even though he's already swamped. And at home, he frequently picks up the slack, doing extra chores and errands because he thinks his partner will complain if he doesn't. Lately, it's been leaking out. He's making passive-aggressive comments and rolling his eyes when his partner sits down in front of the TV and he's stuck doing the dishes. Poor Oliver.
Oh, yeah.
Is he a victim here? What's going on?
Well, he certainly feels like it, especially if you have any codependency in your background. What I hear that Oliver may be stuck is he doesn't want to bring it up because he's afraid to upset his partner. He has some negative assumptions going on that if I say something, my partner's going to be upset or my partner's going to get mad at me. And, I love the acronym for fear, false evidence appearing real, because so much of the time our fear is based on nothing. And when we actually say, hey, I'm overwhelmed, I need help, most of the time the other person is glad to meet us halfway and say, oh, wow, let's work this out. The other thing that I really hear is that overwhelm of, and then that passive aggressive comments leaking out. And, I think that's the gift of our anger and our resentment, is that it gets our attention that, hey, we have to set a boundary here because something isn't okay. And we're doing things in our lives, saying yes when we mean no, that we really don't want to be doing anymore. And to me, I always celebrate my clients when they're at that wall, because even though it doesn't feel good, and yes, you are leaking out into passive aggressive comments, which is not ideal, you've at least hit your limit. So you have the opportunity to go, okay, what do I need and how do I set a boundary here?
That's a nice way to reframe that into something positive, like hitting the wall is
like,
now it's my chance to make a change instead of just continuing on. Well, I think you're right that there's a lot of assumptions that are happening for Oliver, that he feels, he seems to be assuming the worst is going to happen if he says no or stands up for himself in any of these situations. And I think a lot of us can relate to wanting to please people, being afraid of, maybe not even just having them be angry with us, but having them feel disappointed. I think part of the assumption here is that his partner or his boss knows how he feels and that he's overwhelmed and he's upset about these situations, but we can't assume that other people know how we feel unless we tell them. And so I think there's a communication gap here where Oliver is probably, making his passive aggressive comments and so forth, assuming that's communicating how he feels and that he's unhappy, but it's not an effective form of communication. And it's not actually explaining why he feels this way, what exactly is the issue that needs to change. And so there's no way to get to a solution from the passive aggressive place. We need to get to that more assertive form of communication. And I think the other thing, with Oliver is that there's probably a need for, some self-reflection and really looking at why he is stuck in this pattern. We know that, so many of us, and I think, both you and I can definitely relate to this, kind of people-pleasing behavior, but we know that it starts early for most of us. This is not something that, most likely just developed for Oliver in this, relationship or in this job situation. It's probably been with him for a long time, would be my guess, because that's typically what happens is that, and if we can kind of look back and figure out where the roots of that are, then that's a place where we can start to change some of those underlying beliefs, that it's not okay to ask for something. It's not okay to have a need. It's not okay to disappoint somebody, and start working on trying to change some of the beliefs that then drive the behavior and the people pleasing that's going on.
Right. Because my sense with Oliver is that he just doesn't trust himself enough to be honest and to say, hey, I've reached my limit. And, self-trust is something that we don't often talk about, but if you don't trust your own perceptions and you don't validate them as being good enough because they're yours, instead of comparing them to, well, what's somebody else going to think if I set this boundary? Our boundaries really are unique to us, and everybody's looks a little different. What upsets me doesn't upset you. So to have to expect that we're all going to be doing it the same way is really unrealistic.
Yeah, I might actually even suggest that he doesn't trust his partner and his boss in some ways. I mean, maybe not in the most obvious way that we think about trust, but in the sense that he doesn't trust that they could tolerate him saying no.
Right.
As if that's going to be too much for them to handle, or the relationship can't sustain that, versus believing that it's, going to be okay, that we can have conflict, we can disappoint each other, we can work through struggles and difficulties, because that's the reality of relationships. So I think that's
Right.
a healthier mindset to have, is that, this relationship, whether it's professional or personal, can withstand some of these struggles.
And I do see that a lot in intimate relationships, where there's this sense of fairness that can be a trigger for people. And they start to look at, well, I'm doing more than you. And it becomes a tit for tat versus, globally, can you guys both feel like it's going in the right direction and you're each taking care of yourself, versus having that tally of, well, I did the dishes last night, you didn't do the dishes this night, because that can be crazy making. And it's really hard to keep track of that stuff. So sometimes when it comes to chores and things like that, we have to have a bigger viewpoint and not get locked into what so-and-so is doing versus what we're doing.
Right. I mean, we want to feel like we truly are part of a team,
right.
And there's, that both people will contribute in their own way. And those contributions may not look like they're equal at this moment in time.
Right. And they can change.
Oh, they will.
I mean, sometimes I give more, sometimes my husband gives more, and that's okay. It's trusting that flow versus being exact. Because I notice the clients I have that are very exacting and wanting it to be 50-50, it's just unrealistic, and it can set you up to be pretty frustrated. But I love that Oliver's at his limit.
So that's one good thing, even though it seems like it's a negative. I love that takeaway. So if you're feeling you're at the limit, it's almost like it's a crossroads.
That's right.
It's your opportunity to make a needed change.
My website is counselingrecovery.com.
Or mine is livewellwithsharonmartin.com.